Well, today I might be walking a tightrope for some as we talk about sheep. Yeah, maybe you've considered sheep for your ranch, or you're one of those totally adverse to it. Well, either way, I think you're going to find today's topic very informative.
So I think the old school rule of thumb that you can, if you have a 400 cow ranch, and you can probably run 400 ewes and not even know it.
Sage Askin, a rancher from Wyoming that runs cattle, sheep, and goats across several states, is my guest as we discuss the details of his sizable sheep operation and why it's part of his enterprise mix for his ranch. On today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills here with you. We're glad to have you joining us. By the way, today is episode 59. And if you were tuning in to the very beginning of the intro, yes, you know we are talking on sheep. And I jokingly kind of referred to that I might be walking a tightrope with a few folks because I know there still might be some roots of some of the bitterness that was held between these two industries and between these two industries clear back to the late 1800s. In fact, they say back in the about 1870 through 1920, there were about 120 engagements occurred in 8 different states and territories where at least 54 men were killed and some 50 to 100,000 head of sheep were slaughtered over what they coin as sheep wars or sheep and cattle wars. So that's kind of why, I sort of was joking about that. But I know that folks, if you're listening, I would gather that most of you are listening because you're out there to try to learn more information for maybe you're wanting to expand your ranching operation or just your own information knowledge database in your mind. And I think today's program, you're going to be quite surprised. My guest is Sage Askin with Askin Land and Livestock out of Lusk, Wyoming, as he operates cattle, sheep, and goat herds across several states. And I think you're going to find our conversation with Sage today very, very informative. So I invite you to join us for that. Also, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. And meteorologist Don Day will be dropping in towards the end of our program as well with a look at our long-term weather. Right now, a thank you to the sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, the American Simmental Association. Heterosis works, which is why with Simmental, it's more per head, period. Find out more at simmental.org. Other sponsors include the American Hereford Association, Come Home to Hereford, and the North American Limousine Foundation, Limousine Cattle Deliver to Your Bottom Line. Other sponsors today include Keneally Angus with their spring bull sale coming up on Saturday, March 26th. Find out more at KeneallyAngus.com. And finally, the American Angus Association. Look for the registration number by the power by registered Angus bulls. Well, it's time now to check in with the Captain, Tim O'Byrne, publisher and editor of Working Ranch Magazine, for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Calving's in full swing for a lot of you. I want you to research the Madigan Squeeze. The Madigan Squeeze. They use it a lot on young colts, those dopey colts that are kind of laying around. You got to go on YouTube to get it, Justin. I know a lot of us know how to use it. But you go on YouTube and figure it out. Madigan Squeeze for these calves. It works for calves. You put the rope around and do it this way and kind of, you'll see it on YouTube anyway. I can't explain it on the radio, for crying out loud. And the second thing, Justin, I wanted you to ask Don Day to explain, drill down a little bit deeper into this solar minimum, solar maximum. I researched a little bit online. It's really interesting. I didn't even know anything about it, but we're going in. So if the trough is down low on the graph, we're going into this 8 to 11 year solar maximum. All right. So in about 5 or 6 years, it's going to be higher temperatures, more sunbursts. I'm not a weatherman. Get Don Day to explain it for us, but it's very intriguing. Back to you, Justin. I know you have a great show. I'm on deadline. I got to get the heck out of here.
All right, you bet. Thanks, Captain. And yes, when I visit with meteorologist Don Day here in just a few moments, we're going to talk about it. In fact, something that's been going through my mind that I wanted to do, I'm going to visit with him about getting him scheduled here in the next week or so to do an entire show with us on weather, not only the long-term forecast for the next couple of months, but maybe further out, the next half a year to year, and some of the things that they're watching and patterns that they're watching that could affect our weather across the country. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to get into our featured topic today as we talk on the subject of sheep. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show. It's a competitive calf market, and buyers want calves that will perform, period. And a proven solution is Simmental. In fact, data from the Tri-County Steer Carcass Fraternity from 2002 through 2018 on nearly 60,000 head of calves revealed that Simmental sired calves represented the highest carcass-valued sire group over English and other continental breed groups. And the sire group that was the second highest carcass value was Sim Angus sire. So, the proof's right there. For low-risk, high-potential calves with earning potential, be confident that Sim Genetics will give you more per head, period. Stand strong, Simmental. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills with you, and we thank you for joining us on our program here. If you're just joining us, we're going to be getting into our featured topic here today for the next three segments, and it is going to be on sheep. And I kind of made a joke in the opening that I might be walking a tightrope with some of you folks that are totally adverse to the sheep, to running sheep or having sheep on a ranching operation. But nevertheless, I really think in a lot of ways people aren't just going to just totally tune out because of what we're talking about here today, because I think it's going to be super informative. Maybe you are just strictly a cow outfit and that's what you want to be and that's what you want to stay. That's fine. But I also know there's folks out there, because I've had requests for us to do a show on this, on the sheep industry. So I know there are folks looking at it and would like to know more about it. And for those folks, I think you're going to get a lot of information today. And back to all of you folks that might just be strictly a cow outfit, that's fine. But I think there's some stuff here, too, that you're going to find interesting. So I'm glad to have you joining us here on our program. Well, I'm going to introduce my guest today, Mr. Sage Askin with Askin Land and Livestock out of Lusk, Wyoming. He is my guest today. And Sage, I want to thank you for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. And I guess to start off, let's just give folks kind of an idea of what you're all doing and what your operation, your ranch includes, so that we kind of get a basis of where you're coming from as we continue with our conversation about your sheep enterprise.
Okay. Well, our operation as it stands, we have 3 primary enterprises, and we alternate the scale of those as the market dictates. We do custom grazing, and we call it all one enterprise, but it could be cattle, sheep, goats, whatever. But custom grazing is that enterprise. And so it's running somebody else's animals for them as a service, really. And then our production enterprises basically shift between cow-calf and sheep. And the cow-calf sometimes has a stocker segment, sometimes not. So in a nutshell, we are, and our sheep specifically are hair sheep. We have the mountain ranges, largest and pretty well known locally adapted herd of hair sheep, pretty much Dorper influenced. And we do sell some of those as an all natural meat product that is butchered right here in Wyoming and shipped east. So that's the primary enterprise.
Okay. So we're going to mainly focus our conversation here today on your sheep enterprise, because about a year or so ago, as I put out on our podcast here about folks, giving me an idea for topics, and somebody said, it'd be nice to have somebody come in and talk about the sheep business and the sheep industry. And of course, here in the West, sheep were a major component to a lot of our ranches growing up. I know I grew up on a sheep ranch. You were around it as well. And there was a lot of sheep influence in the West, starting down as far as down into Texas and all the way up. So for you, as you come into this and starting into the sheep industry, what were you looking at, and what brought you into this business, into the sheep side of things, rather than just kind of be where we see so many guys just kind of stay in the cattle business? Why did you bring sheep into your mix for an enterprise?
Well, I came from the range side of things. And so growing up, I always heard the stories. Grandpa had a band of sheep, right? And I didn't know much about that. It happened before I was born. And he was out, So my mom always had a little farm flock. And so I was used to the mechanics of sheep, going out. I did night checks, all that growing up, 4-H and FFA. I kind of shifted over towards more goats, but for better or worse, small ruminants were probably in my blood a little bit. However, I was kind of the guy, like a lot of people are, running numbers, and I'll tell you what, nothing looks better as an enterprise than sheep. And you sit there and you run it 4 different ways, and you're saying, why do I even need to own cows? And so I'm kind of a risk taker. I was on a ranch in the Wind River, right on the Wind River, west of Riverton. And that ranch had a pretty significant browse component. And to be honest, I somewhat naively thought that sheep would complement the cattle on the ranch and eat a different part of the range resource. So I came from a range perspective to sort of be my final justification to tip me over into getting a load of sheep. And it kind of went from there. I did find that they didn't necessarily, they still graze and they compete with the cattle for forage. Goats are much more, more of a complement, but the sheep and the cattle certainly use the ground differently. They use finer forage and things like that as well. They use places that are further away from water. And me being me, I tend to scale up. And so before too long, I had a big sheep range that was completely vacant. And that's just an opportunity for a young guy. And so I jumped on it and used that as my winter base and was summering the sheep out there. And that was a pretty good compliment and a good operation. So.
Now, you specifically deal with haired sheep. I know you have familiarity with wool sheep as well. So let's talk about what took you towards the direction of doing a haired sheep versus a wool sheep, and maybe your perspective on either of those different types of sheep.
You bet. Originally, the buzz in the wool sheep industry, there would be a couple of reasons people would tell you they'd get out of sheep. And one of them is a lack of shears or lack of, steadiness of finding shears. And you hear all kinds of terrible stories about trying to lamb woolly ewes. They haven't been shorn and the lambs are dying because they can't get a hold and suckle. And all that just did not sound appealing to me, have to do that whole process. Plus, I'm kind of low input. So I was looking for a low input animal. The hair sheep fit the bill on that, at least on paper, certainly. And secondly, I thought that they were a better niche animal for marketing purposes. I'm always trying to not be in the main commodity markets and try to get a little bit removed from that, and the hair sheep certainly fit the bill. They've become a little more commoditized now, but it is still, it's way beyond a fad, but it's still fairly niche where we're kind of insulated from the ups and downs of the wool sheep industry. I have nothing against wool sheep. I think wool sheep probably winter a little better. Which seems evident, they have a wool blanket. and then I think that wool sheep really fit the traditional model in Wyoming of wintering out on sagebrush and, a little bit of corn. I think they fit like a glove. I think the hair sheep are a higher value product, a little better mothers. And we've just went that direction because originally we bought half and half, more or less, of the two different. And we had to pick a direction and go with that rather than complicating things. And so we picked the hair sheep just to be different more than anything.
Sure. Let's talk about in the course of a year, kind of the timing for you. I know folks, just as we are in the cattle business, they calve at different times of the year. Sheep folks, probably similar ways. There's some that lamb in the winter months. There's some spring months and then maybe summer months. But let's talk about your year routines that kind of take place within your sheep operation.
Well, to walk through the whole production cycle, we could start with lambing. That's certainly the most fun and rewarding time of year. And we try to do that in May and June. And we just like the idea of the worst weather event that's going to happen would be a real late blizzard, and it's fairly rare, or just a generally we just get a warm rain, and it doesn't seem to affect the lamb crop. And they just seem more vigorous. Nutrition's a really big deal. So we're lambing on green grass, May and June, range lambing. They do all the things that come with that. It's very old fashioned. It's a bit of work for about a month. And the sheep aren't real mobile during that time. After that, they kind of take off. We're doing open range herded operations, and the men are pretty good at that. We may have 2 or 3 there for lambing season, and it just drops back to one guy, and that's how he is the rest of the year. So I'd say 11 months out of the year, there's one man at sheep camp, and he's managing his band of sheep, and he has some production incentives to do a better job with those animals. And we've learned to do that. And so he might take those lambs on. His goal is to keep them on good green feed and grow those lambs out. About 70-pound lambs will wean off. You can say 60 to 80 is kind of the average. At roughly 4.5 months of age, And at that time, we pull all the lambs, and we kind of shift gears to trying to get flesh back on the ewes before winter hits. And then we finish all of our lamb marketing through the months of, say, December, January, February, March. And during that time, we're developing. We turn rams out. To get a May, lamb would be in December. To get a June lamb would be in January. And so December, January, we're focused on getting the bucks out and just wintering the sheep at the cheapest rate possible, And so some winters are worse than others, and cold spells and all the things that come with that. So we're just constantly trying to keep them going more or less at a maintenance ration. They more or less double their feed consumption. In all anecdotal evidence would point to that when they start lactating, even with just one lamb at side. And so we've really tried to focus that on being the forage flush. And other than that, we're only handling the sheep between 4 and 6 times a year. The rest of the time they're on the range, they're eating, they're performing, and kind of paying us back.
Mm-hmm. So. You referenced just a little bit ago, your sheep camps, your labor. Let's talk about the details of that, because it is very much like the old sheep camps. I mean, we've all seen pictures of sheep wagons, and you're maybe not necessarily using a traditional old sheep wagon, but the concept of what's going on there is pretty much the same, I would say, as it was years ago when we just had sheep wagons out there. So I want you to talk about what you're doing for labor with that, and the guys you're referring to, and kind of how that's set up out there.
You bet. Yeah, Justin, it's more born from, necessity. and where we didn't have any infrastructure, we had to figure out, if we wanted to have sheep, we had to figure out how to keep them home. And the little hair sheep, that first winter without a herder, I was not the most friendly guy in the community, and I didn't like that. Our sheep were squirting out every which way, and they're little fence crawling boogers. And the woolly sheep are a little better at that, but the lambs of woolly sheep are just as bad as hair sheep, and it's just a mess, So a lot of our fences in Wyoming are pretty poor, and our attempts at electric fencing them didn't work. So we got herders. And we also didn't have barns. And so that's kind of why we went to the range lambing and doing the whole range setting. And so in a nutshell, they're the camper because we can't afford a antique such as a sheep wagon.
I know.
They're $10,000 deals with a hole in the roof, and kind of a vintage market, So, but we can usually pick up an old camper that is pretty sufficient for $2,500, and that I stay in when I go out there, and so we don't mind that. So in a nutshell, beyond that, it's the new modern version, and so they're out there with maybe solar panels, generators, 4-wheelers, a little air compressor. And they're able to kind of be pretty self-sufficient. We bring them food every 2 weeks. We are in contract with these are H-2A workers, and they're on a government work visa. Mm-hmm. And so we have a lot of rules and stipulations that we have to follow. So typically the ranch managers on the ranches that we're at, which could be us, but could be on extemporaneous ranches that we're leasing pasture on, we do ask the ranchers to check in on them every 4 days as we're obligated to do by the federal government. And usually they get their grazing plan from whoever the ranch manager is at the time, tells them where to take them. And we manage the grazing by moving the camp, as you well know, and so, yeah. Mm-hmm. And the whole dynamic, works well once you scale. When you have less than 700 sheep, it's pretty difficult to afford that herder. You start adding that next load, 2 loads, you get up to 12 to 1,400, and it starts to look really good, not only on paper, but in practice. So.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of answered my question there, because that was the next thing I was getting to, is what's the scale that you need to be at to run those herders with there. So you answered that question. Well, let's take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to continue. My guest is Sage Askin with Askin Land and Livestock Ranch. He ranches down around Lusk, Wyoming, and when we continue, we're going to continue talking more about his sheep enterprise that's part of his ranching operation, as we talk about lambing percentages. As you heard, they do it out on the range versus traditional barn lambing that maybe some folks are accustomed to, plus a lot more questions that we have about the sheep industry that I know a lot of us are probably not real familiar with, and we're going to continue when we come back on the Working Ranch Radio Show. There's assurance in buying bulls from a proven program, and a program that's been proven time and time again is Keneally Angus. So mark your calendar now for Keneally Angus Spring Bull Sale, Saturday, March 26th. That's the fourth Saturday of March, offering 550 head of yearling, 18-month, and coming 2-year-old bulls. Now, these bulls are fully guaranteed with free delivery nationwide, and bulls out of the industry's leading sires with genomic-enhanced EPDs. You can buy in person, leave them a bid, or bid online at Northern Livestock Video. For more information or to request a catalog, go to KeneallyAngus.com. It's Keneally Angus Spring Bull Sale, Saturday, March 26th at 12 noon Mountain at the ranch south of Whitman, Nebraska.
Sale season's here again, and there are a lot of black-hided Angus bulls on the market, but not all of them are registered. Why take the risk? Don't gamble on unproven genetics. Invest wisely with registered, powered by Angus bulls. Backed by the power of the American Angus Association and 80 million data points, registered Angus bulls give you the confidence in your buying decisions. Don't buy an imposter. Look for the registration number. Buy the power. Buy registered Angus bulls.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. By the way, today is episode 59, and I only point that out to also just remind you that if you like a show or you want to go back and listen to an episode that we've had, the easiest way to do that is search on any podcast provider out there under Working Ranch Radio Show. Shoot, I think if you even just type it into your web browser, you're going to find our podcast site where you can go and you can listen to any previous programs. You can share that link to folks you want them to hear it as well. We've really had some great shows here to kick off 2022. In fact, last week we were talking on risk management and fetal programming. Those were two separate topics, not related, but two separate topics. A couple of weeks ago, we did a show on feed efficiency, a coefficient to profitability, one of the largest first week downloads of shows that we've had since I've been doing the program. And so that was a great program. Also, about 3 weeks ago, we did a show with Ethan Wayne. And of course, he's the son of John Wayne. A great interview to hear about his life growing up as John Wayne, as his father, and just some great subjects, great topics. You know, one of the things I try to do with our topics is have things that you can go back in a year or two and listen to that because it's still relevant. And occasionally we have to do stuff that's a little bit more timely, but nevertheless, there are a lot of shows out there that are beneficial to all of us in the ranching industry, and I hope you find some value in that. Well, let's get back to our show here today. We are talking, I should say, about the sheep industry. Sage Askin, a rancher out of Lusk, Wyoming, is joining me. He runs a large ranching operation with cattle and sheep and goats. And Sage, as we left out of the break, I want to go back to talking about your lambing, because I know with you doing more of a range lambing versus maybe what was some folks do across the country in terms of barn lambing. And I'm sure you're saving some other elements there, some other resources there by lambing that time. What's your percentage rates on your lambing when you go to May, June and doing it pasture versus what we've seen? And of course, how I was raised, we lambed in a barn, big barn. And so, it's different. So how does that equate differently from range lambing versus barn lambing?
I think that both of them can be all over the place, but in a nutshell, I think the range lambing tends to be a bit lower lambing rate or weaned lamb percentage, but at much lower cost, and that's kind of the whole reason for doing it. We're in the neighborhood of 100 to 130%. And that's gotten pretty solid as our sheep have gotten more acclimated and they're starting to run in the same range, and year in and year out, they really start performing for us. Sheep don't translocate well. We've moved the sheep a bit frequently to get it up from that. And a lot of the barn lambing guys, they might do 10 to 20% better. So they might get the really excellent ones might be getting 150%. But that's pretty rare. Mm-hmm. I think that 130% out of a barn and 110% on the range are good running averages. for sheep producers with adapted sheep.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about those adaptions that you have in your herd, because you introduced yourself that way and saying I've, one of the largest flocks acclimated, haired sheep acclimated to this Rocky Mountain region. And I think that's something to key on just a little bit, because I think these sheep more or less have more of a southern basis because of them being haired and wool, just as you talked about a little bit ago. So let's talk about the acclimation of that and how that got accomplished with your particular herd and how you've adapted over the years and learning that lesson with them.
You bet. Well, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot of ways not to do it. and I'm by no means has it been necessarily a smooth ride, and the learning curve has been steep. But I will say this, we kind of have a system now where when sheep don't perform, they get dull hair coats, they get poor body condition. Just keep it simple and get those sheep out and call them a coal animal that needs to go down the road that fall. Now, we might not sell them as a thin animal, but they're, basically we're using old style cattle, like Lassiter type cattle traits. I think that's kind of what we're focused on with the sheep. It's form follows function. And we are all about functional sheep. So I can't walk through, I couldn't walk through this breed of sheep at the Denver Stock Show and tell you which ones are going to function on the range and which ones aren't. We've done a lot in the early years. We were buying a lot of sheep. We were throwing them out there, and we were letting Mother Nature kind of sift through them and let us know which ones are going to fall apart. And by golly, there's some beautiful animals that just melt in the heat and completely fall apart and sit there shivering in the cold. And then there's some animals that are less visually attractive, but they just perform. They just knock the ball out of the park. We've noticed the Dorper animals, because they tend to fatten very nicely, seem to be really well acclimated to the Mountain West. They fatten well. They put a layer of fat on that protects them, where if you just keep their nutrition up, they really perform, and even in the coldest climates, as you've seen in the past. And so that's kind of in a nutshell. We focused on the nutrition, but we also focus on having animals that we don't have to supplement that much. So our average supplement cost is $15 per ewe per year, and that's up. We used to spend closer to $5, but the market's also up and has borne that out. But we've kind of gotten known for it. Our sheep have translocated. We're running in really rugged environments, largely pasture-based. 100% pasture-based, and it'd be rare when they ever saw. It'd be like the worst blizzard, and they might see behind a windbreak. And because of that, our animals have appeared to translocate to almost anywhere else is going to be, I hate to say it this way, but a better home for them. Mm-hmm. They're going to somewhere that's going to be, greener grass, and we sell a lot of sheep to like the East Coast, and they've translocated really well. Mm-hmm. And so that's been really special. Both coasts, actually. And all across the Midwest. So, yeah.
Let's talk ratios when we talk about cattle or sheep to cattle type ratios, because if somebody's out there thinking, okay, I might be considering maybe reducing my cattle enterprise and would add sheep into my enterprise, what are the numbers that you work with to kind of give that basis? So as a guy's trying to figure this out, how many sheep they could run, what would that ratio look like? That's
perfect. Well, it depends on your range and a little bit on your, not so much your browse, but more your forbs and, your winter range winter browse would be important, your sagebrush, but also your finer fuel and the roughness of your terrain. But all those different variables aside, I would say that, and just as a generality, the regular woolly sheep are a little bigger animal. They probably average 170 pound ewes, and you can just do the math. And, 1,200 pound cow, it's going to be 7 to 1 as a conversion straight across. However, the hair sheep are a smaller body weight. They're a 110 pound animal, and we regularly figure 10 to 1, and it's proved very accurate. I used to figure closer to 8 to 1. And I've actually bumped that up closer to 10 to 1. And they're just a smaller, pretty efficient little package. I will say that I think there's some symbiosis between cattle and sheep on most of, say, Wyoming, and western South Dakota, southeastern Montana. There's a lot of good range there where sheep and cattle can run symbiotically, where the sum of the parts is greater than the parts themselves. And so So I think the old school rule of thumb that you can, if you have a 400 cow ranch, and you can probably run 400 ewes and not even know it. But I think that a lot of 400 cow ranches, if they reduce their numbers by 100 head, and they went ahead and ran their 400 additional ewes, but then they stacked on the 7-to-1 on that 100, they might get to 1,000 ewes and 300 cows. And I think they'd be really happy, and so would their banker.
Yeah. So. Well, and really quick, I want you to go back and talk on that 400 cows, you can run 400 sheep. That's a rule of thumb. You and I are very aware of that because we've been around sheep and grew up around sheep, but just kind of maybe hit that one more time, because that is kind of a normal rule of thumb, and folks out in the western states that have been around sheep a little bit, hit that one more time as far as what that means.
You bet. I guess it's based off of that. Sheep. So think about the body weight. That's the easiest way I think of it. Sheep are so much smaller that it's not 1-to-1. It's not apples to apples. You're talking, I don't know, tangerines to watermelons. And so as you add on a small animal component, they're going to find some forage, resources that are underutilized or non-utilized on your ranch resource. If you have said resource, which many of these interspersed northern mixed prairie type ecosystems have a lot of, think about what the deer and the antelope eat, that's a lot of good getting towards feed that's good for sheep, And so generally that underutilized resource can support that old school, thought process of you can support a pretty good jag of sheep before you start noticing it, and I think it's just a generality, certainly not true everywhere. But I think it holds true, as a good starting place for a lot of these western ranches.
You bet. We're going to talk about the range and diet here in just a little bit, because I know that was kind of your specialty coming out of college was kind of the range, and that was part of the reason why I had sheep on my operation, was how we could deal with some range issues. We're going to get to that in a moment, but I want to hit one more question. And that's something I know somebody's thinking about, and I know it was something that has been a big issue for when I was growing up that put my dad out of the sheep business, and that was predator control. So how are you managing predator control?
You bet. It's a threefold management tool, and it's proved 100% effective. And it is the usage of guard dogs, the open range herding, so the presence of the man out there, and then thirdly, night penning. I think that any one of those is partially effective, but if I was going to give up one, I'd give up the man, because the guard dogs, they work very well, and the night penning means that we put them in a pen every night. That's the one that's really non-conventional in even the sheep world, but we've just noticed if they're in a pen, that guard dog only has to patrol a smaller area, thereby allowing us to use less guard dogs per band, or our guard dogs that are at that band can stay a lot more, in better flesh and better condition and do well while they're there, as opposed to the open range. If they're out, and especially on some of these ranches that are fenced for sheep, and the dogs are having to work a big, broad, a couple 1,000-acre pasture, and then maybe they're having to travel over and work another couple 1,000-acre pasture where there's another group of sheep, I think that's just really hard on dogs. They have a hard time getting around. And so again, threefold approach. I think the presence of the man is a big deal. I think the presence of the guard dog is a huge deal. And I wouldn't have one sheep without one guard dog. But the night penning, I would say, is kind of unique to us. It's kind of our secret weapon.
Yeah. Well, and that's, that can make or break the business right there, is really if you're losing sheep. So let's get back to the guard dogs a little bit. What are you running for guard dogs?
Ours are not unique to us. Three-way breed, primarily Marima, but they would also be with components of Akbash and Anatolian Shepherds. And these are higher powered, Turkish, Middle Eastern type dog breeds that then really nice Western range operations have just experimented with these breeds. And those big sheep herds, especially out in Idaho and Montana and South Dakota, there's people bringing in guard dogs and experimenting with new breeds all the time. And we've just piggybacked on that to get something that's really functional. So.
Back staying on the subject of dogs, because I know your herders, they have dogs as well, and that's an important part of their of what they need, not only for companionship but also just working those sheep. What's the makeup of that, and how does that work with them?
You bet. Well, it's actually pretty special. We've had really good luck. We like border collies. They just are just kind of the right blend of not biting too much, not tearing stuff up, but still being able to give the presence and the eye, and once in a while, a little nip at the heels to keep the sheep together. It's kind of hard to manage these bigger bands of sheep without a dog. Significant attitude adjustment to ours, which are very well dog trained. Once even just a dog is present in the neighborhood. But I would say that our cool story is we've adopted a lot of them from the local animal shelters or pounds. And that's really felt good. And it's kind of funny. You might go in and ask for one that nips at the heels, or something like that. And generally you go read those stories, and there's a lot of border collies that went to city homes and they just got bored and they needed something to do, and they might have bit a child or something like that. And that's, of course, unacceptable. But they work really good in sheep camp. So we've found that a twofold deal. We've actually never had a failure. We've had some better than others, but they've all been helpful. So.
Well, let's take a break here. When we come back, we're going to continue with my guest today, Sage Askin with Askin Land and Livestock. We're talking about his sheep enterprise that is part of his ranching operation, the ins and the outs and the details. Very informative so far. We still have more to come. We're going to be talking specifically about range and just the management of those range conditions with the utilization of sheep. And also when we come back right out of the break, we're going to be talking about what states have the highest population of sheep in the country. Well, you probably have a pretty good idea, but we're going to nut it down when we come back. You're listening to the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Ka-ching! More pounds, more calves, more profit. Studies show Hereford genetics increase net profit by $51 per cow per year. That's $20,000 in additional revenue for a typical 400-cow outfit. And calves sired by Hereford bulls continue to add value through the chain. A documented $30 per head in feedlot profitability. That's real money and real results. Get more ka-ching. Come home to Hereford at hereford.org.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills with you. We're glad to have you joining us on our program today. We're talking on sheep, and it's been very informative so far. We still have one more segment that we're going to have with Sage to talk about that. And then coming up here later in the program, be sure to stick around because meteorologist Don Day will be stopping in with a look at our long-term weather. But as we went out of the break, one of the trivia questions I asked was what are the sheep populations in the state? What states have the highest sheep populations? Well, let's start at the top with Texas has about 740,000 head. That makes up about a little over 14% of the nation's herd. California in at second at 550,000 head. Then it goes to Colorado at 365 head. Wyoming with 355,000 head. Utah 275. South Dakota at number 6 with 270. Idaho number 7 at 250,000. Montana at 8th with 220,000. Then it goes to Oregon with 195, and Iowa rounds out the top 10 for states in the union. They have 155,000 head. So that's the top 10 states for sheep numbers here in the country. Let's get back to my guest today. Sage Askin, as I said, is my guest today. And Sage, as we come out of the break, last time we were going to be getting into range improvements. And I know you come out of college with a pretty strong range background. That's kind of one of your specialties. You're good at it. I know in working with you in the past, you know that kind of stuff very well. And so from your perspective with your sheep enterprise, how is that helping, I guess, when you look at trying to improve range conditions, how is your sheep enterprise a part of that?
We are just finding the old, I like those old, rules of thumb. And one of them that I learned from an old school professor was match the animal to the resource. And I'd give credit to Dr. Jim Wagner down at Wyoming. He just drilled that into our heads. And sheep, just think about it. I mean, the volume of forage that's out there and the ability of an animal's mouth to utilize that forage, really, sheep fit a lot of country where we're trying to run cows. And I think they have to walk a lot less to get their belly full. They might live all day on 5 pounds. Well, it's a lot easier for a sheep to get 5 pounds of feed, and with a smaller mouth, the way they use their almost prehensile lips and tongue, the ability of them to pick up that finer forage might be threadleaf sedge that's 4 inches tall or blue grama. it just kind of makes intuitive sense that a sheep's going to do a little better job of that than a cow with her big broad mouth, who kind of has to be a bit more of a generalist and take whatever she happens to get in her mouth at one time. I'm not opposed to cattle. We love cattle. We're still very top heavy on cattle. Both tradition and market based, but also, kind of getting back to the sheep. I think that it's the form component, the enterprise, the ability to stack. I think there's a symbiosis there where you want some cows, but you want some sheep. And if you were going to put it on a worldwide perspective, you would say that sheep are a higher, gross margin enterprise and deserve some of your best feed and some of your best pastures. Cows are really, really good at one thing, and that's converting really, really low quality forage to something, rather than just letting it sit. And so some of the highest profit, ranches in the world probably focused on their sheep, and their cows are more of their cleanup crew and their bulldozers. And I know that's unorthodox,
almost
but
contrary.
that's kind of another way of looking at it.
That's almost contrary than what we're, because we almost think, well, the cows are the meat and potatoes, and the sheep are the bonus here, right?
Yeah, I mean, but there's a real cultural deal there, and the fun way to say it would. You've heard the expression, I keep my sheep for profit, but I keep them over the hill where nobody can see in my cattle for respectability, But the way I put that, when you think about like all these different cultures in the world, they all have big herds of sheep. It's even biblical. And the cattle have always been like almost like currency. It's like a prestige thing. And I think that just goes along with it. I think a lot of us, I even catch myself slipping back into cattle from time to time at higher ratios than maybe I should be, just because I like them. But the sheep are what's paying the bills, and I can't say enough good things about them, and I'm never going to forget that.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of wind down here a little bit, for you, and I think it's what was nice about having a conversation with you is because you do run cattle and you run sheep, and I think you're looking at a lot of this from a very business perspective rather than an emotional tie, and I think that's something from the ranching industry, as you and I both try to do often, is try to be very business-like. Sometimes you can't help yourself sometimes, but nevertheless, as you have evolved over the years and you look at your sheep enterprise, let's talk about maybe a couple of your biggest lessons learned, and I'm not going to call them mistakes. I'm going to call them lessons learned, opportunities, and then maybe your biggest, what you feel are maybe the two biggest accomplishments. So your two biggest lessons learned and your two biggest accomplishments.
Sure. Well, I would say number one lesson is that sheep are a higher profit animal, but I think a lot of people come to sheep and think, well, they're just going to run out. I've had the question, they're just going to run out on sagebrush, right? I mean, that's the best way they're going to mesh. And I've really learned that that's not really true. There's times of the year in the wintertime when they can get a significant chunk of their diet from the sagebrush, but they need a supplement, and they deserve a supplement, Justin. They're paying for their supplement, and a little bit can go a long ways in boosting your lambing percentage and your lamb crop. And I've really, visually the sheep look fine. And they've been nutritionally challenged, and I've really had to learn that the hard way. So I would say that that's one of the biggest lessons is these things aren't just an animal out there. I really despise the term range maggots. They're not just that. They're a lot more than that, and they will treat you back tenfold for every bit that you treat them well. And so that's one of the big lessons. I was kind of a cattleman going to sheep, and I probably didn't have enough love for them. When I got some love in my heart for the sheep, I really started making it work, so.
Yeah.
And I would say, some accomplishment, it really feels good. So I'm kind of excited where we're going with this lamb marketing. I'm not really going to attribute it to COVID. It was in the work before then, but we're sourcing 400 wethers this year to major distributor of meat. And they're selling online, and that feels really good. We're controlling that animal from there's only two people, and I guess there's three people involved in the production chain. One is just the slaughter facility, the abattoir, But on either side of that, we're the production all the way to basically a grass finished product.
Mm-hmm.
And then these people are distributing it to people on their plates. So however you want to look at that, there's kind of 3 people involved in the life of that animal. That means a lot. That's a success. I think the sheep market, to be frank, a 50-pound box of meat is pretty nice for the normal American family to put in their freezer. And I think it's growing. And the markets really bear that out right now. So I'm excited about the future of the sheep industry.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to join us here. I think for a lot of folks that maybe not real familiar with the industry, there's a lot of information you shared with them. And I hope for folks that maybe have that opportunity to maybe expand their to another enterprise on their ranch, maybe it's something they can visit with. And I know you've been a big resource to folks. Are you good people for people to give you a holler and call and say, hey, I got some questions on this stuff?
Absolutely. You're welcome to link me in your show notes or whatever you've got to do. And we've got a little website that has all of our contact information. So delighted to help. So thank you so much. I've been honored to be helped by a lot. So,
all right. Well, Sage, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you so much, Justin. You're doing a great job with the show.
Sage Askin has been my guest today. He and his wife, Faith, and their 2 kids own and operate Askin Land and Livestock. They're based out of Lusk, Wyoming, but like I said, they do have livestock in several other states with their sheep enterprise and their goat enterprise and their cattle as well. And if you have questions about any of those or how they all are working together, don't be afraid to give them a call. Like he said, their website that you can find all of their contact information is askinlandandlivestock.com. Again, it's Askin with an I, landandlivestock.com. Feel free to reach out and get a hold of him. And I know if you're listening here and you're wondering kind of why I know a little bit about what they're doing, well, some of that has to do with the fact that I ran sheep with Sage. Actually, for about 3 years, they had sheep in here on our ranch here in Northeast Wyoming. And so was very familiar with how they're set up and working with their workers as well. And so that's kind of where that comes from as well. So I appreciate him joining us on our program. Well, stay with us. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day is in. We're going to take a look at that long-term weather when we come back on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
If you could do something today that would bring you a profit tomorrow, would you do it? In the cattle business, it's about efficiency. And with Limousine Genetics in your herd, your profit is just 1 calf crop away. With Limousine or Limflex cattle, it's more pounds naturally to sell at weaning. It's growth and feed efficiency with the added benefit of carcass merit. The other side of the profit coin with Limousine Genetics is the maternal efficiency, docility, and longevity of your cows and bulls. It's as simple as Limousine today, profit tomorrow.
And welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills here with you as we turn now with a look at our long-term weather. Meteorologist Don Day joining us. And Don, I know you were busy traveling here this last week all over the country doing some different presentations and coincidentally on a pretty hectic weather week nevertheless. But as we look ahead for the next and getting underway with the first part of March, you've anticipated that we're going to maybe start to see a little bit more moisture across portions of the country. Let's kind of break that out and where we're going to see that.
Yeah, the expression, beware the Ides of March. I think that's going to play out as we look ahead into the next few weeks across a lot of the United States. Although the first 3 or 4 days of March, I think we're going to have a little bit of a false spring. Temperatures are going to rebound after this most impressive Arctic wave that a lot of the nation is feeling. That's going to ease. We're going to have a nice warm up that'll really go coast to coast. But then after that, we're going to start to see stormy weather first move into the Pacific Northwest. We're going to see the western areas of Washington, Oregon, and Northern California start to get into some wet weather as early as later this weekend and into early next week. And then we're going to see kind of a repeat performance in the sense that we're going to see another large area of low pressure form over the western United States the first weekend of this month and kind of stick around for a couple of weeks. And so what that's going to do is, as these storms hit the western United States, during the month of March, we start to see these storms get a little more legs to them in terms of being able to travel across the U.S. So starting the weekend of the 5th, and I think for the next couple of weeks after that, really across a good part of the United States. There's going to be some active weather, which means a little bit of everything. March is that month where the days get longer, sun climbs higher, and you can get a little bit more in the way of wild weather. And I think that's what we're going to see this month.
Mm-hmm. And so as we start to see that, you said we're going to start to really see it from the Pacific and move across the country. Are we going to see the significant cold weather, or is it just going to be kind of just March stormy, wet weather?
Well, it does look like we are going to maybe have another episode of some pretty cold air, at least relative to the 30-year average. That doesn't mean the intensity of the Arctic air that many areas of the United States have felt this week, but temperatures for the second and third weeks of March are going to be below average. So it is going to be a little bit colder than I think a lot of folks normally expect in the month of March in the central and western United States. Now, there's one part of the U.S. that I think for the first 10 days of the month will be pretty darn warm. That'll be the southeast and the eastern parts of the U.S. So when it's cold in the west, it's warm in the east, and that's exactly what will likely transpire.
All right. Well, Don, before I let you go, when the captain was on earlier in our program, he wanted to have us visit a little bit more about solar minimums and maximums and how that's affecting our weather. We've talked a little bit about it on our program here before, but how about we do this? Will it work for in the next week or so of our episodes that we dedicate an entire program to weather, and we can talk about a lot of different issues? How's that sound?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think we're going to be able to update and have some new information on those cycles to provide folks.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us here on our program today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Again, that's meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. By the way, you can find his daily video podcast on YouTube, or you can find the link by going to his website at dayweather.com. Well, stay with us. We'll put a wrap on our program when we come back after this.
Do you have a young child, grandchild, niece, or nephew that loves the weather and wants to learn more? Day Weather has produced a children's weather journal full of weather facts, fun weather experiments, coloring pages, and pages to record weather observations for every season of the year. The weather journal is for ages 3 to 7 and designed to be fun and educational. The interactive weather projects are fun for the whole family to take part in. For only $10, the Day Weather Journal is a great gift idea for any occasion. Click on our Amazon link to order at dayweather.com.
And welcome back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. As we wrap things up for this episode here today, I do want to give you an idea of some of the things that I am working on for upcoming shows. Of course, as you just heard a little bit ago, meteorologist Don Day joining us here in the next week or two for an episode. We're going to be dedicated fully to weather outlook for the year. Also, lining up an interview with Clint Berry on marketing calves in 2022. Now, I did an interview with Clint about a year ago, and that was where we were at then. But I think this is evolving very quickly, and I think there's some things happening that we need to be aware of. So working on trying to line up an interview with Clint on that. Also market forecasts for the year, and then also an interview working on the topic of beef chain. It's a blockchain verified beef and sheep program that's out there. You might have heard about it. We're going to try to get some more information about what that is. So some topics that I think are relevant to us here in the ranching industry. I want to thank you for joining us on our program. Thanks to our sponsors as well, the American Simmental Association. It's more per head, period. Find out more at simmental.org. The American Hereford Association, come home to Hereford at hereford.org. The North American Limousine Foundation, limousine cattle delivered to your bottom line. Find out more at www.nalf.org. Don't forget, coming up on March 26th, that's a Saturday, Keneally Angus with their spring bull sale. That'll be at the ranch at Whitman, Nebraska, selling about 550 head of older bulls, coming twos, 18-month, and some long yearlings, as well as 6 heifer calves. You can also catch that on Northern Livestock Video. You can find out more at KeneallyAngus.com. And another sponsor includes the American Angus Association. Look for registration numbers when you're buying bulls. Buy the power. Buy registered Angus bulls. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. Join us each Saturday and Sunday at 12 noon Eastern here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM, or on your podcast provider. Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Justin Mills. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.